Shalicina.
The Tale of the Tower That Lost Its Shade. I suppose I should introduce myself. I am Alicia, and I am, by trade, a documentarian of the necessary. I don't mean scrolls or government papers. I mean the things that make the world whole. The bend of a birch tree in the wind, the exact hue of moss on a north-facing stone, and most importantly, the shadow of the great watchtower guards our valley. I spent most of my 17 years on the wildflower meadow below the hill, sketchbook pressed against my knee. To me, the tower was not just stone and mortar, it was a character, and its character was defined entirely by its magnificent, sprawling shadow. That shadow, long and obsidian black, was a constant. It stretched across the fields like a protective cloak, shrinking and stretching with the sun's journey, a silent guardian that moved without moving. When I drew the tower, the shadow had to be drawn with equal detail. It was the very essence of the structure's authority and centuries of unwavering presence. But times change, even for symbols of permanence. We live in an age, you see, where function often outweighs feeling, and appearances are often enhanced rather than simply respected. A few months prior, the local council, in a moment of municipal zeal, decided the tower wasn't dramatic enough after dark. They installed great hulking spotlights, stadium-style beams that burned with a cold, insistent white light, washing the ancient stone in a glare that felt almost aggressive. "It looks like a giant wedding cake," my grandmother groused, shielding her eyes. I hated those lights. They were loud and pushy, drowning out the gentle, subtle moonlight that had always defined the tower's silhouette. It was during one such night, suffocated by cheap synthetic illumination, that the unthinkable occurred. I remember waking with a sudden nagging emptiness. It was the kind of feeling you get when you've forgotten to zip your coat pocket, but magnified tenfold. I rushed out to the meadow, still in my nightdress, clutching my sketchbook. The sun was generous that morning, spilling over the hillside. The grass blades were already casting crisp, tiny lines of dark on the dew. But when my gaze finally lifted to the tower, my breath hitched. It was there, all stone and majesty, certainly, but it stood alone. The tower had no shadow. It looked ridiculous. It was like a king stripped of his regalia, or a portrait that had run out of edges. The sunlight hit the battlements, flowed down the cylindrical body, and then nothing. The ground at its base was simply bright grass. The tower looked weightless, incomplete, and slightly confused, as if it had just misplaced its feet. The villagers' reaction ranged from the dramatic to the wildly superstitious. Old Mr. Pevney, the baker, declared it was a sign of the apocalypse and refused to bake anything but dark rye bread. Mrs. Kubinova swore the tower was now hovering 2 inches above the ground, and that the whole thing was simply going to float away to the next county. I knew better. I knew my drawings. The shadow hadn't vanished. It had left. It had always been the proudest part of the tower, demanding respect and space. The relentless glare of the spotlights must have been an unbearable insult. Why stay when your existence is being actively erased by cheap electricity? The tower's shadow, I realized, must have suffered an existential crisis and decided to quit its job. I packed the bare essentials, my charcoal stick, my favorite pastels, the crimson one was essential for morale, a small loaf of Pevney's dark rye, just in case, and my sketchbook, the crucial piece of evidence. I had to find it. A tower without its shadow is just a very tall, expensive pillar. My journey began southward, toward the ancient, unlit forests where shadows still held dominion. I reasoned that if the shadow felt irrelevant due to excessive light, it would flee to the deepest, most unnecessary darkness it could locate. My search was frustratingly unsuccessful. How do you track something that fundamentally lacks substance? I kept trying to follow its absence, which is, I assure you, a terrible navigation technique. After 2 days of wandering through brush and listening to the local fauna mock my attempts, look, she's chasing a mood, ha ha ha, I met Celestina. She was an ancient, fluffy creature, a great gray owl perched precariously on a crooked oak branch. She wore the look of someone who had seen too many sunsets and whose filing system for memories was severely outdated. "Well, hello there, child," Celestina hooted, blinking slowly. "Are you lost or simply sketching the inadequacy of this particular branch?" "I'm Alicia, and I'm looking for the tower's shadow," I explained, holding up a drawing of the missing silhouette. Celestina rotated her head a full 180 degrees, then another 100, just to be sure. A shadow looking for a shadow? No, wait, a person looking for a shadow? That's utterly delightful, if slightly absurd. I explained the whole debacle, the spotlights, the insecurity, the tower's nakedness. "Ah, yes, the great departure of the negative space," Celestina mused, preening a wing feather. "A dramatic lot, these permanent projections. They always forget that light defines them, not destroys them." I nodded eagerly. "Do you know where it went?" She tilted her head, her enormous yellow eyes fixed on mine. "Its location is known only to those who understand the necessary absurdity of existence, little artist." Oh, great, another cryptic sage. Celestina ruffled her feathers, spraying a small cloud of ancient fluff. "Listen closely, child of charcoal in detail, for my wisdom is heavy and my memory is light." She paused for dramatic effect, then delivered the riddle in a voice that sounded like brittle autumn leaves. "Darkness is where the light cannot be seen, but you will find the light where the darkness will not let you be." Then, as suddenly as she appeared, she yawned hugely, muttered something about needing a nap before the moon was properly aligned, and took flight, swooping off with an alarming wobble. I sat there, sketching the pattern of her wing beats, trying to decipher the cosmic nonsense. Darkness is where the light cannot be seen. That meant the shadow was hiding somewhere profoundly dark, where even the faintest glimmer was blocked. A deep, forgotten place. But you will find the light where the darkness will not let you be. This was the key. If the shadow felt worthless because of light, it would hide where light was utterly shut out. But I would find the truth, the light, of its importance in that very darkness. It had to be the Black Pit Caves, a massive subterranean network rumored to stretch beneath the entire hill. No modern spotlights could reach there. The entrance to the caves was concealed behind a thick curtain of thorny ivy. I lit my small oil lantern and pressed forward. The air instantly became thick and cold, smelling of wet rock and ancient silence. I walked for what felt like hours, my lantern carving a small, frantic circle of warmth in the suffocating black. Finally, I reached a vast cavern, hollowed out like the inside of a giant drum, and there he was, the tower's shadow. He wasn't big or imposing. He was curled up in the deepest recess of the cave floor, shivering rapidly, a small, trembling patch of concentrated gloom. He looked pathetic. He was meant to stretch hundreds of feet. Here, he was barely the size of a picnic blanket. "Hello?" I whispered. The shadow startled, rippling slightly. "Oh dear, visitors. Are you a very small bat? Please be quiet. I am trying to achieve absolute non-existence." "I'm Alicia. I came to bring you home." The shadow sighed, a sound that rustled the cave dust. "Home? What home? The tower no longer needs me. It has those dreadful, blinding white sticks poking at it all night. I am redundant. A relic. That's not true. The tower looks ridiculous without you." "A meaningless detail, Alicia," the shadow lamented, sounding exactly like a moody teenager. "I used to be defined by the sun and the moon, grand, natural lights. Now I am defeated by a maintenance crew and a surge protector. It is humiliating." I pulled out my sketchbook and flipped through the pages. "Look," I insisted, pushing the book toward his gloom. "This is the tower on Midsummer Day, and here you are, magnificent and long. This is the tower under a harvest moon, and here you are, fractured but strong." The shadow looked at the drawings, and a shudder ran through him. "You don't understand, little artist," he hissed, his voice dropping to a panicked whisper. "It wasn't just the rejection. It was the power of those lights. When they first hit me, they were so strong, so utterly without nuance, that I think I absorbed some of them." He rippled again, and to my astonishment, tiny, sharp slivers of brilliant, painful white light flickered within the blackness of his being, like trapped static electricity. "I am infected," the shadow wailed. "I am a contagious void. I am a dark thing, full of terrible bright energy. If I touch the tower, I might illuminate it from the inside out, and the whole thing will simply evaporate in a puff of white dust. I am terrified of myself." I stared. The tower's shadow was suffering from light poisoning. This was far more complicated, and frankly funnier than simple insecurity. "A shadow cannot burn up a castle," I stated firmly. "That's physically impossible. You are defined by absence. You are the negative space. The light in you, that's just residue. It shows you how strong your substance is, that you could hold something so intense without dissipating." I pointed to the drawings again. "You are the mold of the tower. Without you, the tower loses its weight and its history. You are the proof that the tower is solid, real, and worth the sun's attention. Your value isn't in your strength to overpower, but in your ability to confirm." The shadow was silent for a long moment, the tiny trapped lights twinkling nervously. "So, I am not irrelevant? You are essential. You are the period at the end of the tower's sentence. And the trapped light? We'll walk it off. Or, perhaps," I grinned, "we'll use it." Convincing the shadow to leave the cave was like trying to herd smoke. He was still convinced he was a walking disaster. "I can't simply walk up the hillside, Alicia. I lack dimensionality. I keep mistaking my own edges for boulders." "Then we will do it together," I responded, hoisting my lantern. "You may be defined by darkness, but I am defined by light and the ability to find my way back to where I started." Our return journey was chaotic, blending the tangible and the intangible. The shadow, being a creature of 2 dimensions, couldn't truly cross rivers or climb cliffs, but he could slide through the thickest, blackest patches of woods and underbrush that even I couldn't navigate easily. "Lead the way, Shadow," I'd call. "I am trying, but everything looks like me. Did I just walk into myself?" "Oh, I think I did," he'd reply miserably. I soon realized the true power of his light poisoning. When we entered a dense, moonless thicket, the shadow would focus, and the tiny, trapped slivers of light inside him would burst outwards for a millisecond, illuminating the path ahead like a series of microscopic flashes. It was just enough for me to see the tangle of roots, a kind of shadow-powered navigational strobe light. In return, I became his physical anchor. When he felt his edges blurring, he'd briefly attach to my feet in a quick, dark slap, reminding him of the tangible world. I pointed out the constellations, the fixed points of light in the sky, teaching him how to navigate using things that were eternally present, not just physically immediate. "See the Great Bear? Use that as your constant guide," I instructed. "But what if the Great Bear decides it's tired of being seen and moves to a cave?" the shadow asked nervously. "Then we will draw a new Great Bear," I assured him. We raced against the clock. The shadow needed to be united with the tower at sunrise, the moment of perfect definition and clarity. We reached the foot of the hill just as the first hints of rose and gold were staining the eastern horizon. The tower stood above us, lonely and stark, its stone now catching the gentle dawnlight. The spotlights, thankfully, were off, their harsh white beams silent and defeated by the impending sun. "This is it," I breathed. "The sun is coming. You need to take your place." The shadow trembled violently, the residual light fragments inside him flashing like a faulty wire. "I can't. What if I fail? What if I'm misshapen now?" I knelt quickly, took out my crimson pastel, and drew a thick, confident line in the damp morning dirt, tracing the exact spot where his long, protective form should fall. "You fit perfectly here," I said, looking him straight in his non-face. "You are the tower's twin. Now go. You have a job to do." He hesitated for one final, agonizing moment. Then, with a sound like a great inrush of air, the shadow stretched out, flowing up the slope and enveloping the base of the tower. As the first golden ray of the sun crested the mountainside, it hit the tower, tracing its outline perfectly. That light flowed down, and just as it reached the ground, it fused with the shadow, filling the space I had drawn with the crimson pastel. The shadow settled, powerful and vast. It was glorious. The entire village gathered below burst into a cheer that echoed up the hillside. The tower, finally complete, looked infinitely stronger, more grounded, and profoundly dignified. Its shadow was crisp, dark, and wonderfully real. If anything, it seemed stronger than before, perhaps incorporating the bizarre energy it had wrestled with. I stood there, watching the returned majesty. The tower was whole. I waited until the morning was fully established, then headed back to my favorite position in the meadow. I unzipped my sketch pad to the newest blank page. I drew the tower, capturing the texture of the stone and the grandeur of the battlements. Next, I drew the shadow, imposing, stable, stretching across the field, exactly where it belonged. And then, in the bottom corner of the page, a small yet entirely essential detail, a tiny sketch of a young girl, Alicia, standing proudly beside the immense dark shape, right where the base of the tower met the beginning of its shade. She was small, perhaps insignificant compared to the centuries of stone and the vast reach of the shadow, But she was proof that sometimes the most important task isn't to build a thing or be a thing, but simply to remind something essential of its own worth. And that, I decided, was a detail worth documenting.
Alicia.